All right, so we have some things in front of us today that we're going to help you take a look at the practice soldering board as well as some wires to start practicing and soldering up so you can be ready for building your first drone together. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 6 wires that we've already prepped and kind of have right here. These wires are right off of motors. We've trimmed them off, and they actually still have the factory tin. Tin is a term we use about when we're talking about solder or solder that's actually already flowed onto a surface. Tinning and proper tinning is actually one of the key components to making sure that your soldering comes out correct and as optimal as possible. And so when we say we're going to tin something, that means we're going to take some fresh solder and we're going to put it, flow it onto the surface that we're talking about. So in this case, we need to tin or pre-solder the tips of all of these wires. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and take the solder and have it spooled out and kind of just bent upward. We're going to move away anything that we don't want to get splatter on, so any flight controllers, ESCs, practice boards, anything. And we're going to have our iron set to 740 degrees. We're going to go ahead and what we're doing in this process is taking the tip of the iron. We're going to be touching the actual surface, in this case, the tip of the wire that has just got a little bit of factory solder on it. And then the other side of the wire, we're going to hold to the actual solder. And as soon as it heats up, that solder, you see it to the tip of the wire. So we're going to do that to make sure that it's nice and flowed completely, which when it is, try to take a look at this. Again, we've got our solder here. And you can see, focus. There you go. It's nice and shiny. It's a little like a little ball of solder that's on the tip of that wire. So that's really nice. We're going to go ahead and do all of these. Once we have all of them, we're going to now move over to the board. On this board, we're going to practice with, we're going to actually be soldering to the smaller of what are basically ESC motor pads. So on one side you have 4 fat ones, and on this side we have 6 small ones. These are the side that we're going to practice on. So once again, before we do anything, we want to make sure that we have flowed the solder onto, oh, flowed the solder onto the pad that we're trying to work on. So, oh, there we go. So we're going to start by touching the pad with the tip of the iron. And as we do, we're going to touch the pad also in a similar spot, but not quite on the iron. And as soon as that pad starts to heat up, which if your iron is a good iron and it's set to, again, 740 degrees, should only take a second, it should start flowing the solder onto the pad. And then you just flow solder on there until the whole pad is nicely covered. It's going to be shiny. And then you can move to the next one, the next one. In this case, there are what are called through holes. And those through holes are, depending on who you talk to, a few different reasons. One, you can actually put wires through the holes, but it's actually not a common practice and not the best practice. It can cause wires to break. The other idea is through holes allow heat dissipation, especially when soldering, and if something is to warm up, it is going to help it dissipate that heat faster. So depending who you talk to is going to depend on what the answer is. I'm going to go ahead and move this over here and get it in a position where I can now take the wire, which again is tinned already and pre-soldered with some fresh solder. And then we've got over here the tinned pad. We're going to go ahead and the trick is going to, or not the trick, the technique is going to be to touch the pad first. As it softens up and melts, bring the tip of the pre-soldered wire to it, and it should just instantly kind of suck in and just become one. Again, here we're going to do the same thing. You can see, again, this takes literally less than 2 seconds, 3 seconds. If you're holding the iron to the pad for more than 3 seconds, something is not right. So we're going to go ahead and set these down nicely. Oop. That's actually a good example. I'm going to show you how to fix that in just a minute. I'm going to go ahead and solder the... Actually, I can't even get the next one because it's crooked. So to fix a crooked wire, not a big deal. We're just going to touch it, and we're going to turn it where we want it. We're going to hold it until it cools and let it go. It's really important to hold your wire until it cools all the way. If you move the wire while it's still not all the way cooled, you can cause little micro fractures and little pockets inside, which is basically a cold joint. Now that we've got that nicely done, I can show you everything's bright and shiny, smooth. This is going to be what you're shooting for when you practice. So we're going to send this board to you with a fresh board and some fresh wire. Feel free to use this board as well as the other board, and you should try to replicate this on any of the pads that you can. You can use other wire, smaller gauge wire, and start practicing on some of the other pads. That's always a good thing too. And for that, we'll go ahead and show you. There's two things to be aware of when you're talking about wires. We've got silicone coated wires, which you can usually tell because it feels really, really rubbery. But basically, you know it's silicone when you can touch it with an iron and it doesn't melt. So didn't get anything melting there. Over here, we've got what is supposed to be a silicone wire according to its manufacturer. It feels like a silicone wire, but when I touch this one with the iron, it melts. It's all melted and gross. So this is not a silicone wire. And when you don't have silicone wires, you have to be really careful because they melt as you put too much heat. If the plastic coating on the wires are melting, you're going to want to turn the iron down. Non-silicone wires, you're going to solder right around 500 and 550 degrees Fahrenheit. For silicone wires, you can keep it at nice hot temp if you want, but you can really drop these down to somewhere in the 600s if you really wanted to. That being said, we're going to keep our iron at 740. We typically just run the same temperature all across the board. And the reason we do that is, tip control, making sure that we, again, never touch anything too hot, too long. And then the other thing is the tips themselves. So your tips themselves, you really want to use the most effective tip possible. In this case, we're using kind of a medium chisel. You can see this tip here. It's a medium. It's kind of got a little bit of a flat spot on the tip. It's a great little tip to use, but basically anything in the medium size and up is going to be best for all the different wire sizes, even these smaller wires, which you can see I'm just using my fingernail, by the way, to pinch the tips off. You can use a wire stripper or wire clippers. The reason I don't on small wires like this specifically is it's really easy to grab some of the strands of the wire and just shred it, and so then you end up chasing the length. If you use your fingernails, you can get them nice and all done pretty well. You don't even have to have long fingernails or anything. So we're going to take this now and we're going to go ahead and we're going to pre-tin literally all these wires, and we're going to show you really how you can take these, and we're going to put them all along the edge here, this small edge. So remember, we're going to do first is pre-tin, right? Take this. We're going to get our boards out of the way so we're not doing anything on the boards. We're going to move fast again because it shouldn't take but a split second for this stuff to tin. Not saying you have to be super fast. I'm saying remember the time that you want to leave the tip of the iron on anything is minimal. Make sure you also have your copper mesh that you're, dripping off whenever you're getting a little bit too much of your solder on your tip and it's about to drip. Always wipe it off somewhere, either here or on your sponge. All right. So we've got this guy back. And we're going to go ahead and pre-tin all these pads real quick, right? Again, 1 second or two, shouldn't take long. All right. And we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to start one by one, dropping each one on, split second, move. There's no rhyme or reason. I'm just doing them in line in order. Even if I get them wrong, who cares, right? This is just practice. Again, this is me just showing you and sending to you an example of what your soldering techniques should look like and how to practice. So we're going to go ahead again. Don't take how fast I'm doing this as how fast you need to be doing it 1 to 1 to 1. It's how fast the iron should be pulled away and how clean everything should look with just a little bit of heat and a few seconds of heat. That's the key here. We don't want to hold the iron again to the board. If you hold that iron to the board, you're basically sending heat all the way through it. Every single trace that's connected to any trace that you're on or even adjacent is going to be starting to heat up and start bringing heat to all those components. So we just did here. I think, what do we do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 small gauge wire, probably 30 gauge. We just dropped on there pretty easily and swiftly. Again, you're looking for that nice, clean shininess, the clean ball of solder, and everything nice and firm. Always tug on your wires too. Give them a little pull. Make sure everything's good. It's all seated. You're always going to want to take a look really closely. If you've got a overhead light with a magnifying glass, totally great. But basically, you can use your phone. You can zoom in on these areas. Make sure there's no little strands touching or anything bridged. But there you go. Let me know if you have any questions. We look forward to doing your build with you, and hopefully this gets you a step closer to having those really nice solder joints when we get together. Fly safe, fly smart.